अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुह। नहमदुहु व नुसल्ली अला रसूलिहिल करीम, अम्मा बाद। आज का सबक सुन लीजिए।
Let us listen to the Aaj ka Sabaq, which is delivered daily by Hazrat Maulana Muhammad Yunus, the son of Hazrat Maulana Muhammad Umar Palanpuri rahmatullahi alayh. Lesson number 931. Important lesson for each one of us, and something that we need to be very cognizant about, and that is the fact that sometimes we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or many a times we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we feel despondent, why is our dua not getting accepted? In the month of Ramadan we're making dua, Hajj we're making dua, Jumu'ah we're making dua, but we're not finding the acceptance of that dua, and it creates despondency. But if there's one ibadat of Allah where we don't get despondent regarding, and that is that the dua that we make, we should never get despondent about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says, and ask of me and I shall give you, I will answer to you. So from the understanding of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, these are not the actual words of the hadith, please do keep that in mind. From the understanding of the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we learn the one thing is when we make dua, then what we ask for, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. The second thing that can happen is that either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes some sort of a difficulty from us, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us something which is better to that. Or the third thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the akhirat, He keeps it by Him, and thereafter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for what we have done or what we have asked for, and that dua that we wanted and we begged Allah and we required it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserved it for us. So when we go in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give it to us. From another hadith we learn that on the day of Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call a person and He say, you asked for a certain dua. He said, yes, O Allah. He said, well, that dua, I never granted you that, but rather I removed this difficulty from you. Or that dua that you asked for, I never granted you that dua, but I removed a certain worry from you. And like that, every dua of his, he'll be reminded of, and every dua, Allah will explain to him the effect of that. To the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell him that certain dua you have not been granted, this is your reward in the akhirah for that dua. At that time, he will wish that if it's possible, all his du'as were not accepted, so that in the akhirah, that reward he could gain from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the poet says, the meaning of which is, yes, the distance perhaps is long, but the direction is correct. The distance is long, but the direction is correct. Perhaps we were not able to reach our destination as we wanted to, but the way and the eagerness to travel has always been there. So when we're making dua, the first thing is either Allah will give us immediately what we ask for. The second thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us better than that. Like in the story of Maryam alayhi salam, her parents made dua that they wanted a son that will serve Masjid Aqsa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them a girl, a daughter, through which Nabi Isa alayhi salam was born. What a remarkable replacement Allah had given them. The third thing is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove some sort of difficulty. Our dua is going to the heavens, and at that time some sort of difficulty and calamity is coming to befall us from the heavens. So in between there is a accident that happens between the two of them, and between the two of them, there and there, fatilka batilka, one for the other, and it is squared up. Not the dua is accepted, but in return also no harm is fall upon us. And one thing that could happen is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He keeps it in His treasures, and He makes it an installment for us, and He makes it an investment for us. So on the day of Qiyamah, from the treasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us. So never ever be despondent with regards to dua. Allah will give us. Allah give us the ability of begging from Him, not only in the month of Ramadan, but perpetually from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.